Hi, I'm Frank McDonough with the Arboretum of Los Angeles County. Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has been at war with insect pests that have threatened his very existence. The methods that he's used to deal with these pests have ranged from something similar to nuclear warfare to as subtle as releasing other pests to take care of them. We're going to be taking a look at this broad spectrum of pest management done by mankind here on Gardens of California, where we look at the history, the community, the technology, and the possibility of your California garden. We're live and we're online. That means that you can call me at any time with your gardening questions at 1-800-339-1193, 1-800-339-1193. And if you're in the class, you have been hopefully taking the test, and so far I've gotten about 60 to 70% of the tests back, and I gotta say I'm very impressed. You're doing very well. Keep up the good work. And also, for those stragglers out there on the test, the 28th is the deadline to get those tests in, so please do get those tests in. And also I need everybody who is in the class to post where they're going to go, what botanic garden they're going to for the project. So go to the Toro web and post that in the discussion group. If you have any questions about any of this and you're in the class, email me at frank.mcdonough@arboretum.org. That's frank.mcdonough@arboretum.org. Also, if you have any plant questions and you're too timid to go on live here on Gardens of California, you can also use both that email address and that number to get in touch with me with your plant questions. So, we are going to be talking about pesticide use throughout the history of mankind, the civilized history of mankind, and we're going to see how that has varied from, again, the subtlety of nuclear weapons to what we have now known as integrated pest management. That is basically using intelligence and brains to use the least invasive and least destructive method to control your pest problem. We'll also be looking at 10 of the pesticides, 10 of the pest control products that you should not do without. We'll also be taking a look at your questions later on. And, of course, as with every Gardens of California, we have our what is it, a plant item that I asked you to guess. And if you do guess what this plant item is, not only do you get my respect, but you get the respect of everybody else watching Gardens of California and one of these fine Arboretum mugs right here, which holds a whole bunch of botanical squeezins, like coffee, tea, or whatever else you happen to like to put down into your system in the morning to get going. 1-800-339-1193 is the number if you know what this plant is. 1-800-339-1193. Pay particular attention to the flowers here. So if we can get a shot of the flowers, I'm going to tilt it toward the camera. Look at those flowers. What is this plant? It's not a common plant, but it's not super uncommon. You probably, if you're an expert gardener or you're really into plants, you may know this plant. 1-800-339-1193. If you think you know what this plant is, 1-800-339-1193. The Arboretum is a hub of horticultural activity. We have all kinds of things going on there. We have garden clubs that meet there. We have landscape associations that have their trade associations meet there. We have professional pest control societies who have their tests there. I mean, you name it, it happens at the Arboretum. Again, we are a hub. And so I'm going to go over some of the items that are going to be happening at the Arboretum that you can come to or bring your family to. And of course, coming up March 3rd and 4th, not entirely plant related, but just close enough, is the Monrovia Rockhounds Show and Sale. Now, when I was a kid, I loved rocks. I was quite the little geek rockhound. Loved every minute of it. Belonged to the Valley Independent Petrologists. If there's any Valley Independent Petrologists out there right now, go VIPs. The Monrovia Rockhound Show and Sale is put together by local clubs in the area. It's March 3rd and 4th, and it's from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. call that number down at the bottom of the screen if you want more information, 626-821-4624. Also coming up is the Environmental Education Fair. This is great. If you have kids that are grade school or even high school age and you want to get them aware of the environment, of the actions that they can take to help improve the environment, or you just want, if you're a teacher and you need lesson plans, this is a great place to go. The Environmental Education Fair, its whole purpose is to provide teachers with ideas for lesson plans and educational resources for teaching about the environment. A lot of times they'll have people from the LA Zoo with animals there. They'll have insects there from all over the world. You never know what you're going to get at these education fairs. They're fantastic. And that's March 10th and 11th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Again, call 626-821-4624 for more information, or go to our website at arboretum.org. That's www.arboretum.org if you want more information on that. And the Ikebana Show, Ikebana International Show, is coming up. That's March 17th and 18th. Ikebana being an ancient floral arrangement art practiced in Japan, and it uses very natural looking pieces of plants from around the area. It's always good to use native plants if possible, but that's not necessary for Ikebana, but it's a beautiful Zen-like method of arranging plants. If you want to learn more about that, they're going to have their international show at the Arboretum March 17th and 18th from 2 a.m. to 4 p.m. And let me just mention a couple things that are coming up that aren't on the agenda but are really interesting. And one is the first Tuesday of the month, and that would be this following, not this next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. There is the meeting of the Entomological Society, and they're going to be talking about all kinds of neat topics. It's a little esoteric. Most of the people that belong to the Entomological Society are pest control professionals. They're entomologists that work for government, but it's always a great presentation. Even if you don't understand all of it, they do a great job of presenting what the latest pests are, what the latest pest control methods are. So you can check that at arboretum.org. Also, our plant sale is coming up the first weekend of May, and it's now the Los Angeles Garden Show. All the information you need about the Los Angeles Garden Show has just been put up on the web at arboretum.org. So go to arboretum.org and click the little icon at the very top of the page, and you'll find out more about this great event. Again, not only do we have vignette gardens that are designed by top landscape and garden designers for you to take a look at, give you ideas about what you can do in your garden, but we also have plant vendors from all over Southern California, and you can find plants you can find no place else there at the LA Garden Show. So that's the LA Garden Show, May 5th and 6th. Call that number for more information, or you can go on our website at www.arboretum.org. Now, beautiful weather out there, slight chance of rain, really great for planting. Is it time to plant yet? Well, right now I would put it off maybe a little bit, but it's getting very close. First couple of weeks of March, you want to either be planting or thinking of planting your spring annuals. This video coming up is Mark Cardoza from the Flower Fields, which, by the way, is a great place to go to anyway, even if you're not planting out in front of your house. And what the Flower Fields does is, besides being a great tourist attraction in itself, beautiful, huge beds of ranunculus, the color is just amazing, but they help test and develop new plants that they bring in from Europe to put in your garden. So let's take a look at Mike Cardoza as he explains about the Flower Fields and what they do.
Hi, my name is Michael Cardoza. I'm the general manager here at the Flower Fields here in Carlsbad, California. Flower Fields is a working farm about 80 years in the making. Flower Fields crop started production in Carlsbad in approximately 1922 off of Agua Hedionda Lagoon. Shortly thereafter, Edwin Frazee started growing that crop, and it's migrated around on coastal North County here for the last 70 plus years. The flower fields is in the same location today that it has been for the last 20 plus years. And right now we're a working farm that opens to the public as a theme park. The main purpose of the crop that you see behind me is for tuber production. We're the largest ranunculus tuber producer in the world, and we'll produce about 9 million tubers here annually. Ranunculus crop that we produce here is grown from seed. We produce the seed on site, and the seed's not available anywhere else. We have our own mother stock area, and just the nature of this particular crop, it doesn't produce seed very easily. The flowers have very small amounts of pollen and no nectar, so they don't attract any insects to help pollinate. So we produce the mother seed in a mother stock area, and it's hand pollinated. In the beginning of the season, we'll dress that seed on the rows, irrigate overhead for about 24 days to germ the seed. The seed's very slow to germinate. And once the seed starts to germinate, we'll pull off the overhead water and irrigate from sub-irrigation. We'll start harvesting those flowers in March, and we'll harvest them through May, and we'll sell a good portion of the cut flowers, only about 2% of the available flowers, but that's still a huge number. This crop here at the flower fields will produce about 200 million blooms annually if you counted the spectrum of blooms across the crop. Yeah, so if you're buying Tecolote ranunculus now, you're going to get something that's a far superior quality product than what was sold 25 or 30 years ago. There have been 50 years of hand selection that have been dedicated to this crop to bring these fine colors and fine qualities forward to the public. This item is called Brazilianthus. It's a wonderful little border item. It returns every year if it's planted in the garden. It stays compact and it stays full of flowers for about 9 months out of the year. It's just a gorgeous little item. It's a drought-resistant, disease-resistant variety. The drought resistance is a pretty important factor today as we're all trying to conserve water. It makes a really nice little border item. This item is Babiana. It's also a product of South Africa. It's also a drought-resistant item. Adds a lot of gorgeous color again in the garden. It's a little taller, so something could be used intermittently between borders and backdrops. Right now I'm standing in a block of purple. This is a recent introduction for the Flower Fields Ranuncula line. This bloom that I'm holding in my hand right here is a pretty good example of what we're trying to achieve. It is an open pollinated crop, as I said earlier. So the way we make selections like this is that after we have a crop that's stable and producing, we'll go through and we'll mark items that have the qualities that we're looking for. We're looking for full double flowers, nice sturdy stems, good rosette shape to those petals, nice solid uniformity of color. You'll see a lot of variation in the color behind me. It's because this block hasn't been selected yet. We're still in the selection process to clean up this color so that we have a nice uniform color like this purple shade that's in my hand. We're also looking to try to get away from the single flowers and stay heavier to the double flowers. You can see a big difference between those two blossoms, even though they're from the same cross. The selection process takes at least 5 years, at least 5 crop years for us to be able to select it and have that nice double flower and have it consistent. I'm standing here in one of the Flower Fields color projects. This is called the Enclosed Garden. Artist Patricia Patterson out of Southern California has created a canvas that was about a 3x4 canvas. In turn, we've taken that 3x4 creation and created a 4,000 square foot 3D environment, recreating her colors using plant material for the palettes. It's great inspiration of color use for people to see how they can take this color or similar color, place it in their own garden and create a similar environment. Easy to be creative with color. The Flower Fields has branded more than 1,500 varieties of spring blooming annuals and perennials. Tremendous opportunity for the home gardener to have a giant palette of color in which to enhance their own garden. There's a huge amount of research, time, and effort has gone in developing these varieties. Most of the varieties that you'll see that are Flower Fields varieties are from propagated cuttings. We'll take mother stock, produce.
Hi, welcome back to Gardens of California. That was Mike Cardoza from the Flower Fields talking about the flower fields and the introductions that the Flower Fields brings in to the horticultural trade and the introduction process. That is a fascinating process, by the way. The technology and the genetics and what they're using to bring new plants to the market. And these new plants are beyond what people used to have for annuals. I mean, not only do they bloom more often, but they hang around for several years as opposed to just 2 or 3 months. If you want to know more about these types of new plants, the best place to go actually is your local well-stocked garden center, any garden center that has what is known as a certified nursery professional, and they should be able to answer your questions about those types of plants, these new color annuals coming out. 1-800-339-1193 if you have any gardening questions, give me a call. And let's take a look at the What Is It, which is to my left here. And this is the What Is It. That's it right there. And I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to give you a substantial hint. It's one, it doesn't really have a common name. Its common name is a combination of its genus name and where it's originated from. Its genus name and where it originated from. And where it originated from is a South American country. So the name is genus name and then South American country. So if you know what this is, give me a call at 1-800-339-1193, 1-800-339-1193, and you will win one of these fine Arboretum mugs right here, which is just perfect for your favorite botanical squeezings. Now, I told you we would be talking about pest control, pests, and the history of pest control. The history of pest control goes back quite a long time, the known history, and there's probably been pest control before that, but some of the earliest mentions of pest control are that which was practiced by the Sumerians. The Sumerians in 2500 BC used sulfur to help control insect pests in areas of stored grain. As they dust the sulfur around the stored grain, they dust the sulfur on plants, and the sulfur had a protective action against the pests. It would prevent pests from moving on into the grains. It would prevent pests from moving onto the plants. Sulfur is a little bit of a problem, though, and that sulfur can burn when you apply it, but it was fairly readily available. Now, it wasn't the most common product around, but there were fumaroles, which are vents in volcanoes that produce sulfur, and whole communities would spring up just to mine the sulfur there for such uses as pest control. Also in 1200 BC, there's mention of the Egyptians using the plants hemlock and aconite. Now hemlock also known as deadly hemlock. It was used to kill, I think it was Socrates drank hemlock, and hemlock very poisonous, known throughout the classical period as a highly toxic plant, related to carrots, by the way, in the same family as carrots. Hemlock was used as an insecticide, mostly as a rodenticide, as was aconite. And aconite is also known as monkshood. It's highly toxic. It produces a toxin that affects the nerves and can cause a coma-like state or death in people. And it was thought that monkshood, I think monkshood was used by some of the characters in Shakespeare's plays to feign death. Monkshood, very toxic. By the way, it is available. If you want monkshood, I wouldn't use it as an insecticide. Very beautiful plant. You can get that at most nurseries. But monkshood is definitely a very toxic plant, and that's the way it was back then. It was pretty much very unsubtle. You used something that was fairly toxic. It was dangerous to use. If you had a career as a pesticide applicator, it was a short career. In 300 BC, the Romans used hellebore, and hellebore is another toxic plant. In fact, we had helleborus on on Gardens of California last week. That was the Christmas rose. It's a very pretty plant, very beautiful nodding flower. I do believe Saul from Winnetka guessed correctly on that hellebore. and they're still used today as ornamental plants. They have a long history of use as insecticides and as rodenticides. They're very toxic plants. You dry the foliage, you grind it up, and you apply that as a powder, and you have an insecticide. I would not recommend doing this at all. It's too toxic to even deal with. You're talking the dried powder of this plant, you're talking about accidentally inhaling it and really ruining your life. So please don't even get any ideas of using any of these things as insecticides in your home. Sure, they're natural, but then again, so is the opium poppy, which produces heroin. So please do not think of using hellebore out there as a insecticide. The Chinese were very big horticulturalists. They were extremely advanced. Many of their techniques were actually borrowed by the Europeans. The Chinese in between 300 BC and the 1000s have been documented to be using arsenic. Arsenic is a metal, and it's highly toxic, and arsenic mixed with honey is highly effective for ants. In fact, there are some ant products out there that contain arsenic trioxide, which is a highly toxic form of arsenic mixed in with sugar. Arsenic, an old lace, of course. Arsenic used to be the favorite mode of poisoning for many mystery writers in the 20th century. In the 1300s, Marco Polo used mineral oil on his camels. These are all historical notes on the use of pesticides. Now, pesticides were being used quite continuously, but there wasn't a lot of written material about their use. The technology on their use was passed down from word of mouth. It wasn't written down anyplace. There were no agricultural colleges at this time. And so it was passed down from word of mouth. It was written about in Roman times by some of the Roman scholars. In the 1300s, again, Marco Polo used mineral oil on his camels and other livestock to prevent lice, scabies, mites, and other insect pests that laid their eggs on the camels, and later those eggs would hatch and cause a problem. Well, mineral oil is excellent for insect eggs because it smothers the developing insect inside the egg. It prevents oxygen from entering the egg. It also has a direct action against insect tissue in that it dissolves some of the softer parts of insect tissue. And even now, mineral oil is used quite a bit in horticulture, both by homeowners and professionals, to control insect pests. In 1669, arsenic and honey was used in Europe. That was a Chinese invention. Arsenic and honey was used in Europe in 1669 to control ants and other insects. In 1773, they found out there was another great use for tobacco besides smoking it, and that was to smoke out insects that were pests in greenhouses. Greenhouses presented a real problem with pest control. Because they were so highly sealed off from the rest of the environment, the predators that normally would take care of the pests on the plants weren't there, and as a result, pest numbers could increase exponentially in the blink of an eye. Overnight, you could have a huge problem with such pests as whiteflies, aphids, scales, and others. Well, it was found that if you smoke tobacco leaves, not burn, but smoke them in a greenhouse, that would take care of the pests in the greenhouse. Now, the active ingredient in this, of course, was nicotine. And later on, nicotine was used in the 50s and 60s in the form of a product called Blackleaf 40, which is actually still available in some places, and is used as an insecticide. The problem with nicotine is it's highly toxic. And if you were to walk into one of these smoke-treated greenhouses way too soon, that would be your last greenhouse and probably your last memory of life on Earth. Again, pest control, as it was practiced in the past, is a very risky business. It still is, but not so much as it used to be. In the 1800s, a new type of insecticide, Persian louse powder, and this was used by armies to prevent lice. Lice, by the way, were one of the reasons why Napoleon was stopped. Lice transmit diseases like typhus and other types of blood-borne diseases by spreading blood-borne diseases from one person to the other. Persian louse powder was excellent because it was a type of insecticide that could be used on soldiers without killing the soldiers. Now, you could use arsenic on the lice, you could use tobacco smoke on the lice. Everything I've mentioned up to now you could use on a lice infestation on a soldier. The problem is you would lose the soldier. You'd kill him. This Persian louse powder, on the other hand, which was developed in the 1800s, was different. It was not toxic to human beings, and that's because its active ingredient was the powdered extract of a daisy called the pyrethrum daisy. And this daisy contained a compound that was selectively toxic to insects and not to mammals. This was actually the forebearer of modern insecticides, this type of insecticide. In fact, many modern insecticides today have taken the basic molecule that's responsible for the action of the pyrethrum daisy and added different elements to it to make it stronger. Now, this Persian louse powder was great for lice. It wasn't so great for applying on plants, and that's because you had to apply a lot of it, and it was expensive. The suppliers of this daisy were based in Africa and Persia, and they didn't want to let their secret out as to what that plant was, and so they kept seedlings and plants away from people for a long time. The secret, of course, was the pyrethrum daisy. One of the things that actually increased the effectiveness of the toxic insecticides that I've mentioned before and kind of revolutionized insect control using chemicals was the invention of the bucket sprayer. This was a new device that contained a pump, a wand, and a tip that caused the liquid, the pesticide liquid under pressure, to come out through that tip and become what is known as atomized. In other words, it was a sprayer. This bucket sprayer was the first sprayer ever developed in the 1860s. This revolutionized pest control because you could apply pesticides at lower rates and you could apply them much more effectively and much more accurately on the plants. You were able to use less of the toxic pesticides, and you could actually find people who would do this, because up until now, handling pesticides was a suicidal proposition at best. But with the new bucket sprayer and the ability to stand downwind and use small amounts of these insecticidal compounds, being an insecticide sprayer was no longer the short career that it used to be. And so the use of insecticides started to mushroom. It took off like crazy. Other pesticides developed during that period were Paris green, which was a mixture of arsenic and copper, and Bordeaux mixture, which was a mixture of copper and lime. Both of these compounds demonstrated a chemical type of interaction known as, they augmented each other's effectiveness. There's a term for it, synergy. This was the first use of synergistic agents in pesticide use in history. And synergism and the use of synergistic agents, that is, agents that of themselves are not, or chemicals that of themselves are not pesticides, don't have an overly toxic action themselves, but allow whatever pesticide you use to be more effective when you apply it. This also helped reduce the toxicity of pesticides in general and started increasing the lifespan of our hapless hero, the pesticide sprayer. Other things that came out in the 1890s, mercury dust. It was found that the compound mercury, when applied to seeds or dusted on plants, was a great insecticide. Of course, mercury itself was a very dangerous compound, and so, again, even with the development of this sprayer and these things that helped increase the life of the more intelligent and more cautious pesticide sprayers, being a pesticide sprayer was still dangerous. In 1912, things started to change when it came to chemical pesticides, and this is because of a new science called organic chemistry. Organic chemistry was the study and the application of chemistry that had to do with carbon, the basic building block of life. It was advanced and quite popular in Germany, where organic chemists like Bayer and Kuchli and others advanced the field exponentially. Chemistry was no longer the realm of the alchemist and the slightly shady. Chemistry was now becoming very well respected and a science. And one of the chemicals, one of the first insecticidal chemicals developed was a product called para-dichlorobenzene. Para-dichlorobenzene is also known as mothballs. This was two things that happened. One, you had the use of what was known as a benzene ring. Benzene rings are a type of compound that is very persistent in the environment. And you had a chemical process called chlorination. Chlorination is the adding of chlorine molecules to a molecule like benzene, and doing this does two things. It increases the effectiveness of the compound, and a lot of times it increases the persistence of the compound in the environment, which is a good and a bad thing. It's turned out mostly to be a bad thing in light that we developed better insecticides, but back then it was a good thing because you wanted an insecticide that lasted a while. Organic insecticides like pyrethrum would break down within several weeks and lose their effectiveness. Inorganic pesticides like arsenic would wash away because they were water soluble. The chlorinated pesticides were not only very persistent, but they were very unlikely to be water soluble, and as a result, they lasted a long time in the environment. It took them a long time for them to move away from the area that they were applied. Well, you go, what? If they're not water soluble, how did they use the sprayer? Well, they also developed at this time a kind of type of chemistry called surfactant chemistry. And what surfactant chemistry is the addition of compounds into water to enable some of these less soluble compounds to dissolve in water so you can spray the compounds on the plants. So all of this was happening at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. Other chlorinated compounds soon followed, and some of these may sound very familiar to you. TEPP was one of them. Triethyl is a phosphide. I'm forgetting the name on this, but TEPP was what's known as a phosphide insecticide, or a phosphonic acid derivative insecticide. And these were the precursors to two things: products like orthene and malathion, and also some of the more dangerous nerve gases that were developed in warfare. Both of them are related to these organophosphates, as they're called, compounds that contain a type of phosphorus in it that inhibits what is known as an enzyme in us and in insects called acetylcholinesterase. The way these things work is really fascinating. They inhibit an enzyme which breaks down a nerve conductor, or a neurochemical in our brain and in our nervous system. This neurochemical is called acetylcholine, or acetylcholine. Acetylcholine requires, because if it builds up in the nerve synapses, it can kill us. It can actually cause us to go into spasms. It can cause us to go into convulsions, and our breathing will stop and we'll die if we have no way to remove acetylcholine from our synapses. What removes it is an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. These organophosphates they prevent the acetylcholinesterase from removing the acetylcholine, allowing it to build up in the synapses and causing that grisly death that I was telling you about. Now, one of the fascinating properties of the insect nervous system is that it is more sensitive to these acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. And so the organic chemists were able to develop chemicals that were relatively less toxic to man and more toxic to insects because of this property. Unfortunately, these chemicals have the tendency to build up in people's bodies over time. And so if you're an applicator, if you're a sprayer, and you're dealing with organophosphates and you're not careful, they can build up in your body and they can cause you to become sick. So that's one of the reasons that they're not so great. Other chemicals that were developed at the turn of the century during this huge revolution in chemistry, DDT, which was another chlorinated hydrocarbon, like the mothballs, 2,4-D, which was an herbicide that mimicked the effects of a natural plant hormone. It was like a super hormone, and the plant's reactions to it were so exaggerated that it caused the plant to die. That's 2,4-D. And things were looking, with all these new chemicals that were coming out and their ease of application, the fact that they weren't as toxic as some of the older chemicals, this caused a revolution, not only in agriculture, but in horticulture and in people's yards. These things were overly marketed in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. People were advised that if you have a pest problem or your lawn's looking bad, just nuke it with these things. And that wasn't the right advice. In fact, this led to a process in insects where the insects would develop genetic mechanisms to resist the effects of these pesticides. They developed tolerance to the pesticides genetically. And as a result, you get huge rebound effect where the insects that were resistant would take over, nothing would be able to stop them, and you'd have more damage than if you'd have never used the insecticides at all. One of the interesting parts about this is that there's another aspect they found to this rebound effect, and that is that most of the insecticides that were developed early on in the turn of the century, from the 1900s to the 1940s and 50s, were what are known as broad spectrum insecticides. What's a broad spectrum insecticide? That is an insecticide that kills everything in its path that's an insect. Well, what they weren't aware of when they developed these and they developed the use of these was the fine balance, the fine ballet dance of life that goes on in your yard between predators and pests. In the wild, pests generally don't get out of hand. They don't get to the huge numbers that people see in their yards, and that's because they're being taken care of by predators. Unfortunately, even though these types of chemicals that they developed from the 1900s, the new types of insecticides, the chlorinateds, the organophosphates, and later on the corbamates, even though they were less toxic to human beings, they caused a huge rebound effect because they'd wipe out not only the pests, but the predators. And then when the pests came back in and established themselves, their infestations, the sheer numbers of them will be much greater than the initial infestation that you sprayed for. This is known as the rebound effect, and it's because you wipe out the predators along with the pest. And it is the reason that most agriculturalists, most horticulturalists, most pest control programs in colleges are now moving away from the general application of insecticides as it used to be, the reactionary application of pesticides to pests. In fact, they're moving now, it's been quite a movement toward integrated pest management. Integrated pest management means taking the whole of the environment of the pest into account. And another thing about integrated pest management is that integrated pest management uses a type of term, a theory that you can endure so much damage on your plant before it becomes economically a problem. In other words, if you have a strawberry field, you can lose up to 5 to 10% of your crop to pests and still make money. Now, when that percentage gets greater than you can afford, that's when you use the pesticides. It's called the economic threshold. And this was developed initially by a gentleman named Dwight Isley. But before I get to Dwight, I just want to give you a little bit of a parallel history of pest control. Now, pest control was not always done willy-nilly in the nuclear fashion that it seems and through history. The Chinese actually developed methods of natural pest control using botanical insecticides and predatory ants. They would take ants from the mountains that would eat insects and bring them down to the fields and turn them loose. They also used ducks. They used techniques like flooding, which would eliminate insects in the soil. They used many different types of methods in agriculture that were not as brutal as using straight insecticides. So this was actually the beginning of integrated pest control, right way back in the 300 AD and above. Also in Araby, in the Saudi Peninsula, they were using predatory ants on date farms to prevent the damage of the insects on the dates. They would bring the ants down from the mountains, put them on the date palms. The ants would take care of the pests on the date palms. So anyway, in 1920, Dwight Isley developed the concept of integrated pest management, where you use economic thresholds on plants, you use pest counts. And pest counts are basically, you figure out how many pests are out there, and you see if you really need to spray, or you optimize your spray period. You don't waste your chemicals. You try to figure out what the best time to spray is. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. This was the book that brought into everybody's mind how damaging pesticides could be. Now, interestingly enough, it wasn't a book about pesticide damage so much to human beings as it was to sea animals and seabirds. What happened was she brought to light the fact that DDT was destroying seabird populations. And this is because DDT would cause a thinning of the shell of the seabird's eggs. The shell would break before the seabird's eggs could hatch. As a result, the populations of these birds started going down. And one of the problems with DDT is it's such a persistent chemical in the environment that these effects were long-lasting. In fact, there's still DDT out in the environment. Out in the Santa Monica Bay, there's an area that is contaminated with DDT, and it's still there. And this is a very long-lasting chemical in the environment. In 1967, the pink bollworm program was established, and this took into account the fact that pink bollworms were propagated because people left their cotton trash after they had grown cotton. They'd leave the cotton plants up there, and they'd plow them whenever they got a feeling or a hankering to, because they're going to grow another cotton crop there. They weren't in a big rush to plow them down. Now, they found out since that the pink bollworm, if you leave that cotton trash out for too long, propagates on that cotton trash. And so if your cotton trash is turned into the soil before a certain time, then the pink bollworm's numbers are reduced and you have control of a very damaging economic pest on cotton. Well, this program, it fined people who didn't plow their cotton trash under on time. And so it was an effective method for controlling the pink bollworm using a solution that had nothing to do with pesticides. It was totally cultural. Also, integrated pest management at this time in 1967 was given its official name as integrated pest management, and the science of integrated pest management took off. And one of the big leaders, by the way, in integrated pest management is the University of California, Davis. And if you go to their website, you can find out more about integrated pest management, and you can look up ways to control pests in your house using integrated pest management. Now, let me tell you something about using integrated pest management and being a homeowner. There's pluses and minuses. The pluses are that you're going to use less chemicals, you're going to use a lot less in the way of things that are going to harm the plant, and overall it's very good for the environment. The minuses are that integrated pest management usually requires a rudimentary knowledge of the pest that you're looking at, and you have to know a little bit about its life cycle. So unfortunately, many methods that are used quite effectively in integrated pest management are beyond the means of homeowners. But there's quite a few in there that are. And so the address of that, by the way, is ipm.ucdavis.edu. That's ipm.ucdavis.edu. And since then, integrated pest management has taken off. The use of parasites to control introduced pests. In other words, for example, if you're familiar with the lerp psyllid, we just had a huge infestation of small aphid-like creatures, although they're not related to aphids, who would hide underneath this disc that they would make of solid sugar. It was called the lerp psyllid. When the infestation hit in 1998, it covered the state within several months. And within 2 or 3 months, everybody's eucalyptus trees were dripping with sugary sap, and they had these lerps, these sugary little buttons, falling off the trees and clogging up their pools, their sewer lines, their storm drains. It was a mess. Well, the University of California sent somebody out to investigate, and they then created a program where they introduced a parasitic wasp to control this pest. And right now, if you go out there, it's tough to find the pest. I just went out the other day to try to find some samples to show a group of people I was speaking to, and I couldn't find any. All I could find were some of the old marks where the lerps, these round discs of hard sugar, had fallen off, but I could not find any lerp psyllids. Now, there's also the big freeze that we had that probably helped control them too, but that wasp that they put out did an extremely effective job of controlling the psyllid. And that's what integrated pest management is. Integrated pest management is not a cure-all, it's a process. It's an ongoing process where you use the method of least resistance to try to control the pest. And if you're out there and you want to just follow the rudimentary tenets of integrated pest management in your yard as a homeowner, this is some of the things you can do. One is identify the pest that you have. That's the number one. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people say, you know, I saw this pest and I just got the first pesticide that I found in my garage and I just went at it and it didn't work. So what do I do? Well, that's not a good idea. One, not only is it you wasting pesticide and throwing it into the environment, but two, there may be a predator out there that is taking care of that pest and you're wiping out the predator along with the pest, and it takes a lot longer for them to get established, the predators that is, than the pest. And you're looking at that rebound effect that I was talking about earlier. So identify the pest. Two is to, in some cases, to count the pest and make a determination of whether you need to control it. I mean, if you have a pest that's marking up some leaves on maybe 1/4 to 1/8 of the plant, but other than that, the plant looks fine, you may not have to even deal with it. And three, find the most effective method of control. Do a little research. That site that I gave you, ipm.ucdavis.edu, excellent site to go to. I use that probably on a weekly basis. Also, you can come to me at the Arboretum, or you can go to the Agricultural Commissioner's office, which is in Paramount, I do believe. And you can go, I'm going to be going to their website a little later on too to show you that. And you can go to there, and they have entomologists on staff. They had plant pathologists on staff. In fact, one of our regular guests, Jerry Turney, is on the staff of the Agricultural Commissioner's office. You can go there and get an ID, or you can go to your local nursery and ask for a California certified nursery professional. And in general, they have a lot more knowledge than most people that work at garden centers, and they might be able to help you as well. So I hope I've given you some ideas about pest control. The key is subtlety, the key is knowledge, and the key is practicing the kinder, gentler way, so to speak, of dealing with pests. And again, as time goes on with some of the new technologies and the studies in biology that are happening, pest control is just going to get even better. Anyway, that's our lecture for today. I would like to go to a video right now, and let me see this video. I do have some information on. I think I have some. If I'm not, I'm just going to go straight to the video. Yes, I was just at Disneyland. I was just at Disneyland with my daughter. Beautiful floral displays. If you ever go there, you'll see, I mean, like in the main square of Main Street and the area in front of Cinderella's castle, you can't help but, you can't miss these huge plantings of beautiful color. Well, no, you may not be able to afford to do it on the scale of Disneyland, but you can do it with the same techniques that Disneyland uses and other great color experts. And you're going to see this film. This is going to talk about preparing beds for annual flowers. And it's about time to think about that. Now, when we get back from the film, I'm going to add a few things to it because it's a little dated, but most of the techniques in here, the preparation and the planning, are timeless. So let's take a look at this video on how to prep a color bed.
Hello, I'm Terry Michael, and I work for the University of Arizona Extension Service. And on behalf of the Arizona Landscape Contractors Association, we're going to have a training film on a real important subject in the landscaping. And it's this subject that we call color or annual flowers. It's a national phenomena. Everyone is using color. Seed companies, plant breeders are all coming out with new colors all the time. Color is that high value part of the landscape. It's that focal point. It's not to be done in masses. It's supposed to bring the eye to certain areas of the landscape. Remembering that it is a high-ticket item, we really ought to learn how to do it correctly. Because if you don't do it correctly, you're going to have to do it again. That's not going to make anyone happy. It's probably going to cost you money also. We're right now in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have an expert with us who knows everything there is to know about annual flowers. Let's go over and talk to Bill right now. Bill, how are you?
Morning, Terry.
Hi, Bill. Bill Carls is just about as resident expert as you're ever going to find when it comes to all the landscape situations, color or flowers in particular. Bill, I don't know how long you've been doing this, but your name's been around forever, it seems like.
25 years.
25 years. So
Yeah.
you're still probably learning every day, aren't you?
Every day.
We all do, don't we?
We never know it all.
We're talking about annual flowers, and here in the South, but we're talking 2 seasons. Now, in the North, perhaps they have 1 season, but the planting and design are basically the same, aren't they?
They're basically the same as far as color combinations, height, ground covers, and this. We have different varieties here a little bit, but basically they plant these varieties in the spring in the North, and we plant them here in the fall, October.
Now, I think annual flowers or color probably one of the more difficult things, not so much in the planting and the care, but that design. How do you get the combination that both is pleasing to you and, of course, your customer? I mean, is that a problem sometimes?
Well, of course, the customer takes first preference. They do like certain colors over others, but basically we like to establish a focal point when we plant our flower beds. If we have a focal point maybe of out here, we might like to put the tall plants in the back, the mediums in the middle, the shorter ones, maybe the ground covers in the front. If we have a circular bed, we might want to put the tall ones in the middle, the mediums around, clear around, then maybe use some ground cover along the edge. So this varies a lot as to where the customer or the client will be looking at the bed from the focal point.
But when that's established, when the design and these basic concepts of this cascade are changing levels, then the color and texture just about are unlimited. I mean, they're coming up with new stuff every day.
Yes, that's true, and I personally like to see a lot of contrast, both in color and in texture of the foliage.
Kind of like the meadow wildflower look.
Yes,
I mean,
very
in,
much.
in nature, they don't they don't get lined up with
We
colors.
don't like to see the plants planted in rows because, like you say, this is not natural. This isn't the way they grow in the wild, and I think just a combination of just all over the place is much prettier than having everything rowed out like corn.
Right. Bill, these are the winters right now,
Yes,
and we're getting
these-
rid of these. Why don't we go ahead and just start getting rid of this stuff and start getting this soil prepared for this planting for this season, or it could be the planting any time.
Well, the first thing we do at this time of the year is go ahead and pull out our old flowers, which are looking bad at this time of the year.
And then we'll go right into soil preparation.
Right.
Because digging out the flowers is actually part of soil preparation. Let's do it.
Well, let's do it.
Bill, I think anyone can just yank a plant out of the ground. It does loosen up the soil, but why are you checking the roots?
Well, there's a possibility of some nematode damage here, possibility of maybe a little fungus, and possibility of grubs in the soil also. We check all those things, and if we have something like this, we treat the soil accordingly before the next crop goes in.
Also, this is part of soil preparation. You're loosening the soil up, and some of those roots fell off. They're going to decompose. Why don't we just start yanking a few more of these out, and let's talk about what is soil preparation in your mind?
There's a lot to it, and let's go into it.
Let's do it.
As Bill explained to me, step 1 in the soil preparation is removing the old growth. If you're pulling out the previous bedding plants, be sure and examine the roots. They're going to tell you a lot about the problems that may be present. Problems such as nematode damage, there could be fungus diseases, grubs, things that you may want to treat the soil to correct before planting any new materials. If you have any questions about how to treat for any of these problems, one good place to go for answers is your local cooperative extension office. The next step in soil preparation is putting in what may be needed for good plant growth. In many parts of the country, such as the Southwest and the West, some kind of organic matter should be added. This can come in the form of a mulch or compost or peat moss or even well-aged manure. Make sure it is well-aged because manure right out of the pasture, well, it can be a little too rich and it'll burn those tender bedding plant roots. In alkaline soils such as we have here in the Southwest and the West, it's particularly important to use sulfur as a soil amendment. Sulfur is important for acidifying the soil, and it also loosens up the micronutrients for the plants to use. The 3 numbers on the front of a fertilizer bag represent the percentages of the major or macronutrients that are needed for the plant. The first number is always nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the third number is...
Welcome back to Gardens of California. I'm going to cut that video short right there, and I'll tell you why. Because that's the old style right there, throwing in the solubles and the nitrogen. Nowadays, the best thing to go with when you're prepping a flower bed is a lot of the new natural mixes of fertilizers. And they contain stuff like bat guano and bone meal and all this other. And the reason that they're really good for the annuals is not only are they very slow release and they cause the annuals to grow very slowly and evenly, and you don't have this huge amount of growth that's susceptible to disease, but they also increase the flora, the microflora. In other words, all the good microorganisms in the soil, they help increase that. This is Gardens of California, by the way, where we look at the history, the community, the technology, and the possibility of your California garden. I'm Frank McDonough from the Arboretum of Los Angeles County. I'm open for any and all gardening questions right now, so if you have a gardening question, give me a call at 1-800-339-1193. 1-800-339-1193. And again, if you've made it through that lecture, that's one of the more intense lectures that we're going to have here on Gardens of California. And you have that question about the garden, give me a call, 1-800-339-1193. And if you want to take a stab at the what is it, this is it right here. And remember, the previous hint was that its species name, in other words, these are Latin binomial names. This is a scientific name. The species name is the last part. The species name is the same as a country in South America. In fact, this country in South America is in the Andes, part of it, and part of it's on the coast, I do believe. So that's, yes, and it's right above Chile. So, what is it? 1-800-339-1193. Give me a call if you know what this plant is. You will win my respect and the respect of everybody else watching Gardens of California and this fine Arboretum mug right here for your favorite botanical squeezings like coffee, tea, cocoa, yerba mate, whatever you like to put in yourself in the morning to get you going. This mug is perfect for it. 1-800-339-1193. 1-800-339-1193. And that aside now. If you know what that is, give me a call. And if you have any gardening questions right now, give me a call. It is time for our mailbag. I work at the Arboretum of Los Angeles County. And what I do there, I answer plant questions all week long. People calling in from around Southern California, from the United States, and even from around the world, believe it or not. And so I'm going to share with you some of the questions that I have gotten through the years. I had a gentleman, Bob from Reseda, call, and he was asking about how to get rid of a mole in a yard. He had a mole problem. And we went over moles and moles in the yard. We showed you a mole trap the other day. And pretty much with moles, the key is look at what the moles are eating. They usually like to eat insects. They are big on grubs. And so you want to start treating your lawn area, you want to start treating your garden area with what are known as parasitic nematodes. These are small, tiny worm-like creatures that will establish themselves in the soil, and they'll start eating any insect grubs that are in the soil, and they'll bring down the number of grubs. This decreases the food for the mole, and the moles go elsewhere. Another thing you have to remember too is moles really seem to like a loose compost. If you have an area that has bark or a soily, barky compost, you might want to exchange that for a rock compost. And that rock compost, it'll do somewhat the same job as the bark compost. It will prevent water from evaporating, etc., but it won't be a great home for the mole, and the mole will go elsewhere. I also had Teal from La Cañada call, and she was asking about her roses. Her roses had a very strange growth on them. They were growing like threads. The leaves of the roses were growing like threads. So she was wondering what was going on. Was this a virus? Was this a problem? So I asked her a couple of questions. One, I asked her what she had nearby, and she said she had a walkway, she had a lawn, and asked her if she ever used any Roundup or similar product to control weeds in the walkway. And she said, yes, I'd use Roundup on a regular basis to get all the little weeds coming up in the cracks. And I asked her how close the walkway was to the roses. Well, it was right in front of the roses. Roundup, if the drift from Roundup, if you spray it on a windy day, when it gets on a rose, can cause the rose's new growth to look very bizarre. Roses are extremely sensitive to Roundup. And if you get any overdrift from the spraying, you'll get this thready, almost alien-like growth coming out from the roses. So the key is, one, try not to use Roundup if possible right in front of your roses. And two, if you absolutely have to use the Roundup, make sure it's a nice still day early in the morning so you don't get any overdrift on the spray. That's a big problem with Roundup. And roses tend to be like canaries in a coal field. They're very sensitive to herbicides in general. If you see any kind of distortion on a rose, generally the cause is herbicidal. There's some kind of weed killer being sprayed around the rose that's causing that problem. I'm really lucky today. I mean, I get plant questions from everybody, and today I got a plant question from a previous host on a DHTV program, and that is Mr. Donahue, who does the labor law program. He gave me some plants to take a look at because he's having problems with them, and I have them right here. First off, he gave me this citrus. Now, I was looking at the citrus, and of course we have this wilting here, and I thought for a second that might be frost damage, but then I realized this sample that he brought me has been sitting around a while, and that's probably why it's wilting. But what he was interested in was this damage around the leaf here, on this leaf in particular right here, this kind of curly damage right here, and also this in particular. Now, I think we can get a shot of that. And if you look on that leaf, you will see these tracks right here. See that? That is the new citrus leaf miner. This is a new pest. It's been in Southern California for a very short time, the last couple of years. These trails you see right here are the galleries that are excavated by this chewing pest that mines its way through the leaf. It is a type of moth larva, and once it gets in there, it's really tough to deal with. There's very few pesticides that can take care of it. Now, there are a few things you got to remember about this pest. Now, look at this shoot. This is a fairly new shoot on the plant. It's new growth. They prefer new growth. So if you can limit the amount of new growth on your plant, you can limit the amount of pest on your plant. And this is pretty easy to do with citrus, and you can do that by cutting back on the number of fertilizations and increasing the amount of time between waterings. This will decrease the amount of new growth and the amount of the pests that you'll have. There are some pesticides that can take care of this pest that are available now. One of them is a product called Bayer Advanced Tree and Shrub. The drawback with this pesticide is that officially you cannot use it on a food plant. Now, in the citrus industry, this product is used on citrus, but it's not labeled for it, so officially you can't use it on a food plant. So what you do is you turn your plant into an ornamental plant. And how do you do that? You just make up your mind that it's an ornamental plant and you don't eat any of the fruit from it for about a year. So once it's an ornamental plant and you're not eating the fruit off of it, then you can treat it with that product. Very important that you not eat the fruit for at least a year. Keep the fruit off of it. It's an ornamental plant. And then later on, after a couple of years, you can let it become a non-ornamental plant. Now, that's probably not the best way to take care of this pest. The best way to take care of this pest is, like I mentioned before, keep the watering down, keep the fertilization down. Also, there's a sentiment, there's a feeling among entomologists, it's a very educated guess, that this will become less and less of a problem as time goes by naturally, because predators that are naturally in the area will find this pest and they'll take care of it, which is another reason not to use any insecticides like the one I mentioned before on this, because you run the risk of decreasing the number of predators that will take care of this pest. So is this a huge problem? It can be a problem if it's a small citrus. If you've just planted the citrus, you may want to consider using the pesticide on it. That particular pesticide is of any you can use. One is the only one that works well, and two is probably the least harmful to any potential predaceous or predator insects. So a couple of things. Just hang in there, see what happens. cut back on the fertilization, you should be fine. Another pest, he brought me in another problem, by the way, Tommy did, and that's this right here. And I don't know what this is. So I'm going to be taking this back to the Arboretum and probably getting in contact with the Agricultural Commissioner's Office. If you look at this, this is a California pepper. These are the leaves of a California pepper. And if we can get a close-up on that, you'll notice that there are all these pustule-like growths on there. They look like tiny little blisters on the plant. What is that? Well, there are several possibilities of what this could be. This could be a new psyllid pest. Psyllids, some types of psyllids, these are insects that suck the sap out of a plant. Some types of psyllids will inject a hormone into the plant, and this hormone will cause a puckering, and they use that puckering to lay their eggs in. So what I would do before I even called the Agricultural Commissioner's Office is I take this under a microscope and take a look at that and see if there's any insect eggs in these little puckers. The other possibility is that it's a wasp. There's many, many wasps out there that are what are known as gall wasps. Now, these are not wasps that, you know, are presumptuous. These are wasps that will inject a substance into the leaf that mimics a plant hormone and cause an accelerated growth in the leaf tissue, which produces a small structure that they then proceed to lay their eggs in. This is a wasp nest, basically, a nest for wasps that they produce by injecting this hormone-like substance into the leaves. Now, my next step, of course, is to take this back to the Arboretum, do a little search on the internet, see if I can find anything that mentions this pest, call my buddies at the Agricultural Commissioner's Office, and also take a look at that under the microscope. But this is something that I can't tell you what it is right away. This happens a lot. We are living in an area here in Los Angeles that has a lot of introduced plants. These are plants from all over the world. And unfortunately, when they introduced them, they didn't introduce the pest or the parasite for the plant. You know, in nature, plants have pests that attack them, and then those pests have parasites that attack them. And these parasites even have parasites that attack them. So it's a very balanced population of plants and animals out there. But when you take the plant away from that and you put it pristine into another environment and you grow tons of them, you create a perfect storm environment for the introduction of a pest, and the pests become more virulent, they become more potent because you're selecting for those pests that spread the fastest, and so you get these huge infestations like this might be. So that is the mailbag for today. I would like to go to a video right now, and this is along the lines of pest control. This is weed control. And we're going to be taking a look at what to do with weeds and some of the chemical methods you can use to control them. This is an older video. There are other methods to control weeds, but this is a great video to help you identify weeds. Most of these weeds are here in Southern California, even though this is a University of Arizona video, and they're weeds that you will come across when you are gardening. So let's take a look at that video.
Kind of giving you a whole bunch of new terms. I think it's time now that we go out and take a look at some of these plants that we call weeds.
It's a good idea, Terry.
Gary, one of the more important things to remember about looking at weeds is you always got to keep looking down because that's where they are.
Makes sense.
And here we're kind of in the middle of a bunch of annuals, and actually these are summer annuals.
Well, you'd mentioned the term annual. What's a summer annual?
Summer annual is a plant that starts from seed, normally growing in the springtime, grows all summer, begins to go through the blooming cycle, and after it blooms, makes seeds, then it kind of dies in the wintertime. And right below us here are a number of what we call summer annuals. Gary, one of the classic examples of a summer annual weed is this little carpeting sort of thing that we call prostrate spurge. It kind of grows low to the ground, and sometimes if you pluck it, you can even notice the milk, which is indicative of that family this belongs to. And of course, this one right next to it, we call it the wood sorrel, or oxalis. Kind of has a nice triple leaf. Actually, not a bad-looking little
pretty
yellow
little flower.
It is,
That's what I was going to
and
say.
it's kind of a woodsy look. Actually, that's why I got the name wood sorrel. Now, these would be broad-leafed or dicotyledoned summer annuals. And again, right next to These broadleafs are a number of grasses, and this one in particular, the summer annual grass, and cup grass is a real common one, and there are some others, but the southwestern cup grass is, again, a summer annual, happens to be a grass family. Now this summer annual has probably been experienced by a whole lot of people. It's called puncture vine, bright shiny leaves, yellow flower, but it gets its name from its seeds. And the seeds are born in little clusters, and I think people who have walked barefoot have experienced that, and I've got a kind of a big one. And sometimes it's called goat head because as the seeds break apart, actually they do look like a goat head, but one really curious thing about this plant, interesting thing, is they've actually released an insect that feeds on the seed, and I think my thumb has got the guy trapped. He tried to he's coming out, and I don't know. Here we go. When my thumb comes away, you'll see the little weevil try to get out of the, can you see him wiggling around in there? See that? They actually released that weevil to chew into the seed, and that was a biological control. Now it won't help your bare feet, but it'll keep the seed from sprouting for next year's summer annual crop. Purslane is another of our summer annuals. It's got kind of succulent leaves on it, and when they're imbibed fully with water, they really take on almost a waxy appearance sometimes. The bloom is small, but fairly distinctive, that nice purple or magenta color. There are actually some people who look at purslane as a weed, and there are other people who look at purslane and they call it verdolaga, because in reality the stems and the leaves can be eaten kind of like you would spinach, as a pot herb, kind of steam it. I would like to warn you, don't be eating things unless you know exactly what they are. And another warning is you better know the history on that plant. Some people think it's a weed.
Hi, welcome back to Gardens of California. I'm Frank McDonough with the Arboretum of Los Angeles County, and this is the 3-credit college class where we look at the history, community, technology, and the possibility of your California garden. I'm open right now for any and all gardening questions, so give me a call if you have a gardening question at 1-800-339-1193, 1-800-339-1193, and let's take a look at the what is it again and see if anybody can guess it. I don't think anybody's going to guess this one. This is a toughie. I don't think anybody's going to get it. If you give it a stab and you miss entirely, I will have still a lot of respect for you. But this is it right here. Again, its last name is a South American country. The South American country is right above Chile. Its first name is a component that a window has, kind of. It sounds like something that is a part of a window. So, I mean, even with that, if you don't get it, I will still have respect for you. 1-800-339-1193. 1-800-339-1193 if you think you know what this flower is. I'd like to thank Burkhardt Nurseries in Pasadena, by the way, for donating or for lending the What Is It plant. Frankie Burkhardt over there was I worked for Burkhardt's for quite a while, and he's a plant man extraordinaire. Again, thank you, Burkhardt's, and let's take a look. I have for you the top 10 things that you shouldn't do without in your garage. Now, everybody's got stuff in their garage they're never going to use. Lord knows when I had a garage, I had stuff that just sat there. Well, with these, you'll be probably running out of them and have to get more. These are the 10 must-have pest control items for you. And so let me go over them and what they are. First off, this is Monterey Alliette. Monterey Alliette controls Phytophthora root rot, which is very common here in Southern California. Chances are you'll have it. Chances are you already have it. In fact, it doesn't hurt to treat your garden preventatively with this because you probably already have it. And this is it, Monterey Alliette. There's another compound that's exactly like this, and it's called Agrifos, and you can use that as well. Pound for pound, they're probably about the same price. The Agrifos is a little less irritating. This is an aluminum compound, and it tends to be very drying. So one of the big problems you're always going to run up against in your garden are snails. And I have two very good controls for snails. Now, there's cautions with each one of these, but the biggest cautions are with this. This is a product called metaldehyde, and it is fairly toxic to human beings. It's fairly toxic to animals. There's a lot of cases of, and this is the metaldehyde product, there's a lot of cases of metaldehyde poisoning of dogs and cats. And so you want to be really careful with this around dogs and cats. This particular type formulation is a very small granule, so it's less likely to be attractive to dogs. There are formulations out there of metaldehyde that look like kibble. You want to stay away from them. But if you never ever want to use metaldehyde again, and metaldehyde is good to use in combination with this product, but you can use just this product, and this is called Sluggo. Sluggo is basically iron phosphate. Iron phosphate breaks down to form fertilizer. It's very effective at controlling slugs and snails. One of the things that you'll notice about it is that you'll never see any slugs and snails again. You won't even see their shells like you will with the metaldehyde, and that's because they ingest this product and they go into wherever they hide, and there they die. So you don't have to deal with the shells of the snails or anything like that. Very effective product and very, very safe in the garden. Another one that you should have always handy just in case is this Bayer Advanced Tree and Shrub. I was mentioning this earlier with controlling the leaf miner on the citrus. Again, you don't want to use that on edible citrus, only on ornamental citrus. This controls a huge ton of pests, and believe it or not, the chemical compound in this is related to nicotine. It's a nicotine analog that is nowhere near as toxic to mammals as nicotine, and that's what makes it so effective. It's also systemic. It goes into the plant. So you'll be finding there are many times when this is the only thing that can control pests, especially, again, here in Southern California, we get introduced pests that just take over like crazy, and a lot of times this is the only product that will control them. This was when the lerp psyllid came out. This is the only thing that could control the lerp psyllid until they came out with the wasp. So that's another thing that you probably don't want to be without. Horticultural oil. I was mentioning Marco Polo using oil on his camels. Great product to use on just about anything. Citrus, fruit trees, very safe. And it works by smothering the insects. It also has a direct action against their skeletons as well. And it's a very safe product to use. Always keep that around. This is soap. Soap is another great product, but you have to be careful with oil and soap. They're very natural. They're very safe as far as they don't hang around in the environment. But soap and oil both will kill both predators and pests, and so you can have some rebound effect. And both of them can burn the plants that you apply them to. So you have to be very careful as to what the temperature is on the plant that you're applying these to. If the temperature is above 80 degrees during the day, you probably want to withhold spraying or spray very early in the morning or late in the evening, because both of these products and sulfur, which is another rudimentary, commonly used insecticide / fungicide, works both with fungus and insects. These can burn plant leaves very readily if they're used at the wrong time. This is Bug Buster O, and it is basically pyrethrum. I was talking about pyrethrum daisy, which is from Africa, also known as the Persian louse powder. This is the extract of the pyrethrum plant. Now, again, pyrethrums are very, they're very wide spectrum, and so you can have a rebound effect with them. But this is the original pyrethrum from the plant material. It doesn't last a long time in the environment. It breaks down rather quickly, and it's pretty selective against insects. It's very tough to, it is toxic to people if you drink enough of it, but it's a lot less toxic than some of the phosphates I was talking about. So that's a good one to keep around, because you're probably going to be using it quite a bit for infestations of insects that, you've tried everything else and you have no other recourse. This is neem. Neem is the extract from a tree in India. This tree is used as a toothpaste. The neem extract, the neem oil, the extract from this tree is very effective at preventing a lot of pests. Rose growers use neem as a preventative on their roses instead of using some of the old style insecticides. Neem has a couple of drawbacks. One is it doesn't work on everything. And two is it has a very distinct smell to it, and it's a little tough to mix. Well, that's three things. It's a little tough to mix, has a distinct smell. But do try neem out. Neem is effective against a lot of different insects, and it's a very natural type of insecticide as well. This is BT worm killer. BT, I was mentioning before, Bacillus thuringiensis is a type of bacteria, and it is very effective against many leaf-eating worms. Neem, oil, soap, a lot of times these worms are so big that that stuff doesn't affect them, but the BT will. It's very subtle. They eat it. It proliferates in their gut, and they die of a fatal gut infection. And that's what the BT does. In fact, it's not a bad idea to apply this to your tomatoes. It's very safe to use on tomatoes for those big green hornworms. It's not a bad idea to apply this on tomatoes as soon as you see any white moths flying around the tomatoes. If you see white moths, those are either hornworm or looper moths. They lay eggs for these pests, these worm pests, and you know they're laying the eggs. You start applying the BT then, and you won't have a problem with those pests. And let's see, are we finally to the end of the 10? Let's see. There is another one here. Now, this is not exactly a do without. It's something to keep in mind, and that is spinosad. Spinosad is an insect hormone that prevents insects from developing past a certain stage. This works very good for the types of insects that are harmful in one stage and not another. For example, a lot of the fruit flies are harmful at the stage where they are small worms, but they're not, which are maggots, but they're not harmful at the fly stage. So this is when you use the spinosad on them. This prevents the worms from, when the worms hatch, they hit the spinosad, and the spinosad keeps them from growing to a size where they can affect the fruit, and you don't have a problem with the insect. It's a very natural product because this product only works at a certain stage of their growth. It mimics a type of hormone and replaces that hormone in their system, but it doesn't work as opposed to the hormone working. And finally, let's see what else we have here. This is a sulfur spray right here. Sulfur along with oil are two products, and there's also copper as well, but these are products that are effective against fungus. Now, a lot of times you'll have fungus and not insects. For instance, mildew or rust and others like it. A lot of times you can deal with these fungus by using sulfur spray. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with fungus, and that is that a lot of times when you have a problem with fungus, it's something that has nothing to do with the fungus itself. It has more to do with the plant's ability to resist the fungus. For instance, roses and mildew. Some varieties of roses resist mildew better in some areas of the city versus others. Like if you're growing roses on the coast, you're going to have to pick roses that are genetically resistant to mildew. And those roses you can find out by joining your local rose society or talking to a nurseryman at your local nursery. Very important to talk to the local nursery and the local rose society, because this is so idiosyncratic with the rose that a rose that gets mildew in one area may not get any in another. But if you do have occasional problems, because even the most resistant rose or plant will get mildew when conditions are right, you can start using the sulfur spray on that, and that'll help reduce and take care of the mildew. Other things that also take care of mildew are kind of interesting. The neem oil I was talking about before, that's a product that takes care of mildew too. It's not as effective as some other products, but it does work. And so you can kind of kill two birds with one stone when you use that neem oil. You can use the neem oil to help prevent insects, and you can use the neem oil to help prevent mildew. And again, like I was saying, a lot of championship rose growers right now are using the neem oil as a preventative on their roses to grow their championship roses. Anyway, that's it for Gardens of California for today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Nobody got the what is it? It was a hard one. That is Scilla peruviana, or Peruvian scilla. Yeah, you're going, hey, how can we get that? That's just too much. Well, I have to give you a challenge every now and then. So I'm sure you'll be up to it next time here on Gardens of California when we meet. And until then, goodbye and good gardens.